Hey, what's up, my Be Health Empowered family? Welcome back to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. Of course, my name is Dr. Melissa Clark. Please call me Dr. Mel. We are here on Excuse Me, Doctor each and every week, bringing you the information that you need to make wise health decisions, not just for yourself, but of course for your family, your loved ones, and your entire community. So, thanks for tuning in to us on whatever platform that you're checking us out on. If it is on Facebook, please remember to hit that like button. And if it is on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. And we especially welcome our newbies and want to just remind everybody that because we are here to make sure that you get your questions answered, we really want you to just throw your questions in the chat as they occur to you, and we're going to be getting to them as the show goes on. So don't be shy, throw them in there. And of course, the one who brings me all your questions from the chat, the word on the street, all of that, my fantastic co host, Mr. Wayne Bruce. Where are you at?
There, there I am. There
There
I
you
am.
are.
There I
There
am.
you go.
There I go. Dr. Mel, we got to change the
Yes.
questions from the street because I sit here under a bridge. There are no streets. There are only streams. Get it?
Streams. We're streaming.
We're
Oh,
streaming.
okay. I get it
Come
now.
on,
The
Dr. Mel.
bridge,
I'm going to need
the
you up
over
on
the
your game, Dr. Mel.
stream. Okay. Yeah, I get it now. So, for
River,
y'all who are just
river, stream.
listening,
Come on.
Wayne has a backdrop of a river, the Potomac River, and the bridge in behind him. So, I get it. So, we're streaming live. Wayne is by a stream. And what are we talking about today on today's show, by the
Oh,
way?
Dr. Mel, today we're actually airing this and taping this in August, and during the last week of August, we don't celebrate what we bring to attention Opioid Awareness Day, and
Yes.
that's we want to cover that because it seems like we are just in the midst. Our country is in the midst and the world is in the midst of a just an epidemic of
Yeah.
and everything you hear is either fentanyl or some type of opioid. So
Right.
we want to bring you. We have an incredible guest that's going to talk to you about that.
Absolutely. And it's not just it's no respect of persons. It
Yeah.
almost seems random from young people to old people to celebrities, and everybody in between, can be a user of opioids and have a
Hmm.
chance to become opioid addicted. And so, this show is dedicated to making sure that you know what it is, how to treat it, how to work with family members who might be opioid addicted, where to get help, all that stuff. We're going to cover it today with our incredible special guest.
We are, but did everybody remember Red Table Talk? Everybody remembers Red Table Talk with Jada and everybody, right? Jada, her mom,
Mm-hmm.
and her daughter. Well,
Yep,
you were a guest on Red
I
Table Talk.
was.
People don't know that. I mean, people
Yeah,
don't know
yeah.
that.
And well, you're bringing that up now because we talked about the opioid epidemic. We talked about fentanyl, and
Hmm.
that was like a year and a half ago, and things have not gotten any better. So, on that show, they highlighted a teen, a 14-year-old, beautiful girl who died of opioid use disorder. I think it was her second time using, and you know, as kids go back to school now, we want to heighten parents' awareness of this issue too.
Right.
So share this episode because it's going to be full of useful information
Yes, it
that you
is.
can use. So,
Yes, it is. But before we do, we have to
yeah,
recap what's going on in the world of health and wellness, don't we?
we
So
do.
let's go to the recap. Here we go. That's a new set. Look at that. That's something a little
I see.
different. Let me
I
slide over a
see.
little bit. I got to slide over. Go ahead.
That is right. That is right. Well, listen, we haven't talked about COVID in a while, but we're in a surge. We're in an upswing. I've been getting more calls. I've been getting texts, people asking me questions about what they should do. the booster, blah, 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 there's been a 69% increase in cases, which means there's a huge uptick because people aren't really testing anymore. So that means there must be a huge uptick in in COVID. But we are in a different time.
Yeah.
Um, Even though there's this new, more infectious variant, BA 2.86. It's not more deadly, but it is still detectable by current tests. It's more infectious. Um, but many of us now, we have a reserve of immune cells that are
Mm-hmm.
able to deal with the illness better. And so, that's important to keep in mind. But people over 60 are still vulnerable. People who are on medications that lower their immunity, still
Mm-hmm.
susceptible. People with underlying health conditions, still susceptible. About 10% of people go on to get long COVID. So you might want to mask up, especially if you're in one of those high risk groups, um, because it's still important to stay healthy.
Yeah. Why should we still even care if most people have zero to mild symptoms?
Well, that is true. A lot of people do. And so, as I mentioned before, if you are in one of those risk groups or, you have a concern about long COVID, you want to protect yourself, or if your loved ones who you live with are older or have one of those conditions, you want to mask up to also protect them as well and not bring anything into the household.
Don't bring nothing home with you but the groceries.
Right. And also, I just want to close by saying, next month, a new booster is going to be available. So, every year now they're updating the boosters to try to
Mhm,
keep current. So, if you have not
mhm.
gotten boosted recently, next month is a good time to go get that booster.
Man, I can't wait. So many of my friends have come down in the past few weeks with COVID. It is
Yeah.
out of
I
control.
I lost my COVID virginity this time around. So, you
Can we
know,
talk about that on air? COVID Virginia. That don't sound right, Dr. Mel. I'm
well, I
just
lost it. So it's not there anymore.
so look, let's move on. At least you didn't lose it because you were, you know, next thing. Like one drink never hurt anybody. You always hear that. Never hurt. No, maybe it has. Has one
Well,
drink hurt people?
according to a new study, as little as
Okay.
one drink of alcohol a day can increase your blood pressure, specifically the top number, the systolic blood pressure. And that's even if you don't have high blood pressure. Now, here and there, that's not a big deal.
Hmm.
But over, several years, people who drank daily had higher and higher blood pressure. The more they drank, the higher it went.
Wow. So what's a little and what's a lot?
Yeah, so little amounts that they saw, the little amounts in the study that they saw that were increasing blood pressure every day was as little as basically one drink, 12 ounces of beer or 5 ounces of wine. So
So
not a lot.
one beer,
One
or
beer,
one.
one glass of wine.
Wow. But what about that Bible verse where in First Timothy, where Paul says, stop drinking only water and use a little wine because your stomach or your frequent illnesses, something like that, because of your
Yeah, so
stomach, something like that.
right. People misquote it and say a little wine is good for the stomach.
Yeah.
So this is the thing.
Okay.
There are other daily behaviors that can lower your risk of getting high blood pressure. So, exercise, lowering your sodium intake, lowering your meat intake, eating more fiber in the form of fruits and veggies. So, we don't know what Paul and Timothy's lifestyles were. We don't know if they were doing those things so it protected them against the little wine is good for the stomach advice. But if if you are in a risk group for having high blood pressure and you're sedentary, you're not eating well, adding alcohol into the mix is the issue.
Well, they probably didn't have air conditioning and they probably didn't have cars. They might have
So
had
they
one
probably
donkey
walked a lot,
between them. They walked a lot. They walked a lot.
and that probably protected them.
Let me
Yeah,
grab my sandals for a minute. Let me grab my
right.
sandals. But anyway, we want to tell people to buy a blood pressure cuff to monitor, and like the great blood pressure area is 120/80, right?
Right, exactly. So, if you have any question about your blood pressure, I say everybody over 40 should own a blood pressure cuff
Mhm.
and just check it periodically.
Okay, cool. So look, this weekend I was around a lot of my relatives, and they had who is significantly aged, and it was interesting. It was beautiful, and it was tough because uh one of my relatives suffers from dementia. So what's the simple way to stay sharp longer?
So, there was a recent study that showed that
Mhm.
people who are at higher risk for dementia and cognitive decline, um, that their risk was decreased by 48%. That's a lot. That's almost 50%
Mhm.
over 3 years by doing this one simple thing.
What is it?
And that was wearing a hearing aid. Right? So they looked at people, they had a control group, people who
Mhm.
didn't wear the hearing aid, then they had they had people wear hearing aid,
Mhm.
and they found this huge risk over 3 years in terms of huge decrease in risk over 3 years in people that used hearing aids.
Huh?
Yeah, yeah, you need to go get that hearing aid. I'm just saying.
Okay, who's at risk? Who's at risk for dementia?
So in the higher risk group, this is not everybody, right, who would qualify for this. These are people in a high risk group. So people with lower educational attainment and household income, coupled with higher rates of illnesses such as high blood pressure, diabetes, so higher rates of chronic disease, lower resources available to them, they seem to be the ones who benefited the most from this intervention of wearing hearing aids. And it's important to know that hearing aids are covered by both Medicaid and Medicare. So,
Okay.
Medicare is for people who are 65 and above. Medicaid is for individuals who have lower income. And together, they provide the resources, the health insurance resources to pay for medical supplies and services. Hearing aids are covered. So, no reason to not get them.
And turn down your music in your car. If I can hear it in my car with your windows up, turn down your music. Stop damaging yourself. I
Right.
know this for a fact. I'm in the
Yeah.
music business, so I mean, in my other job, when I'm not
Yes.
bringing you the the word from the streams,
From the streets, from the interwebs.
from the interwebs. So look,
Right.
look, we got it. We got a hot one today, Dr. Mill.
Yep.
We got a
Yep.
hot one today. We're gonna go to our segment. We're gonna go to the new segment is
What y'all think? We want to know.
we want to
We got
know.
some
Look,
burning questions that need to be answered.
it's a there's a 235% increase in STDs or STIs or STDs in the past 5 years from in the past 5 years. What y'all
Yeah.
think is going on, man? What's going on?
That's a good question. We want to know what y'all think is going on. And actually, STIs is correct. Sexually
Okay.
transmitted infections. Um, the CDC data show that 235% increase. We're talking herpes, gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, and congenital syphilis. That's when babies are born with syphilis because their moms are infected. Um, and they were already on the rise, gradually prior to 2016.
Mhm.
But then they started taking off. They went down those first few months of the pandemic when everybody was on lockdown, but then boom, they came back with a vengeance and have continued to increase since then. And we know that racial and ethnic minority groups, gay and bisexual men, and young people 15 to 24 are the groups where we're seeing the largest increase. But the thing that puzzled me was South Dakota was the state that had the largest increase. Just throw that out there
What y'all
for y'all
doing
to
in South Dakota?
what's going on in South Dakota. Maybe the audience can weigh in as to what they
We
think is
need
going
to
on
know
in South
what you think.
Dakota.
We need to know
Yeah.
what what are your thoughts? And we're gonna come back to this, but what are your thoughts? Pop it in the chat, pop it in, if you on our Facebook, if you're on our YouTube channel, pop it in. If you're on blackdoctor.org or pop it in the chat we want to know, why do you think there's more
What is
STIs?
going on? Right. And, sexual health is a huge part of health that we all need to be aware of.
Hmm.
Um, and so, but making young people, because we, talked about the 15 to 24-year-olds, maybe it's because they feel that they're invincible and that they don't need to get checked regularly. But there are free clinics out there, to do that. If you're looking for a free clinic, you can go to healthcare.gov and just, search community health centers, find clinics in your area where they'll see you on a sliding scale or for free. So, a huge part of this, I think, my personal opinion, is awareness, and that sense
Right.
that, these things aren't really that all that serious, but they are, because they can affect your reproductive health down the line and sometimes even be life threatening if they're untreated.
I want to give it up for Ellen Claire Lamb. She says, not enough sex ed in middle school and high school. I agree with you. I agree with you, Ellen Claire Lamb. Hopefully,
Yes.
you guys had a lot of sex education in your high school.
Well, since Ellen Claire Lamb and I went to school together, I can say we didn't, and
Really?
we're heading in the wrong direction. We are now headed in the wrong direction in terms of the amount of the curriculum, but I totally agree.
Who knew?
But go ahead and keep putting it in the chat. Thank you
Keep
so
putting
much,
in your
Wayne.
ideas in the chat. I'm going to get
Yep,
out of here, Dr. Mel. You got to get on the show. All right.
absolutely. And so, as you know, we are talking about International Overdose Awareness Day. It's August 31st, and it's the world's largest annual campaign to end overdose and acknowledge those lost to overdose. So, you know, icons that I know: Prince, Whitney Houston, Michael K. Williams, Heath Ledger, and countless millions who were never famous and might have died in obscurity, like the young teen that I mentioned at the top of the show on Red Table Talk. But, acknowledging their loss is important, but it's also important to realize that those deaths are avoidable. And, in order to avoid them, we have to understand what's going on. Why is this happening? What can we do about it? And so, to walk us through this, we have this incredible guest who's a pharmacist. His name is Dr. Gerald Jackson. He has a doctorate in pharmacy, and he is a community pharmacist who owns his own pharmacy in Columbus, Ohio, called Doctor's Pharmacy Downtown. And he's actively involved in addressing the opioid epidemic in Ohio. So thank you so much, Dr. Jackson, for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since a few weeks ago. We reached out and was able to communicate with each other briefly about this topic. So very excited to be here tonight.
Fantastic. So let's get right to it. First of all, what are opioids? I mean, people might not know what they are and what they're used for. Do they have a legitimate use?
Well, I'll just give you a quick disclaimer. Even I'm a licensed pharmacist, so I'm not here to slant opiates one way or the other. I'm just here to give you my understanding and the facts that as I see that they are on opiates and how they are used in the practice of medicine and a care plan for a patient. So opiates are a class of medications that typically bind to neurons in the body that help reduce pain levels for patients and even animals if we want to start having that conversation. So what that means is they anchor to a neuron and mimic what is our natural pain defense, which is called endorphins. Endorphins are what you generally would feel if you bumped your elbow or hit your leg on something, and it typically could be resolved. But as we know, there are many other conditions where you would need a painkiller, and it's appropriate to start based on level of acuity.
So our bodies naturally make these chemicals, endorphins. You might have heard of runner's high. So
Yes.
those are the chemicals that are released that give you runner's high, and there are natural pain medicines, and opioids bind to our nerve cells and mimic this essentially as
Yeah.
we. Yeah. So they're prescribed for pain normally. Um, but where did we take a left turn? Why is there now all this opioid epidemic happening?
Well, that's a great question. Many colleagues that I've talked to, many doctors like yourself, and many just people on the streets that come in for pain medicine. It really, in my opinion, started in the 1990s pain became the fifth vital sign, right? We had blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, many other things. But then we decided that pain in 2001, actually, by the Joint Commission, decided to make it a real measure, that we needed to measure these patients' pain. And as practitioners, we did exactly what we were expected to do. If someone told me that their pain was a 5 out of 10 or a 7 or 8 or a 9, we did exactly what we thought was best and tried to reduce that number to 0, which we've learned the hard way that treating pain to 0 is just not logic.
Right. And so there was an overprescribing. I think it's important to understand the pain that people are going through, but then using opioids was probably like taking a cannonball to kill an ant sometimes. So it got overprescribed, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the public was misled astray, to be perfectly honest with you, regarding the usage of opiates. I mean, plenty of people have seen the movies or the show on Netflix called Painkillers. That show is about Purdue Pharma, but many sales reps that went out and visited doctors misled those doctors with understanding what the addictive potential was of those drugs. Therefore, it became commonplace to use those drugs to treat just even really minor aches and pains.
Right. So whereas now the standard is if someone has back pain, you might give them opioids for 3 to 4 days. Back then, they were prescribed enough opioids for a month, right? And I think it's something like 25% of people who take opioids for more than 2 to 4 weeks can develop an addiction.
Absolutely. We talked about the binding of those opioids to your neurons, but guess what? They also bind to non-neuron places in the body as well, like the stomach, like in areas in the brain that potentially can cause drowsiness, potentially cause constipation, potentially just cause higher levels of addiction. So yes, you're absolutely right. We really didn't foresee what the unlimited use of opiates would do for the general public. Now we're reaping kind of the havoc that we see as the epidemic that we're discussing today.
Yeah. So we know something like 40,000 people, sorry, actually 40 to 100,000 people, depending on the year, have been dying of opioids per year. What is it about opioids that are leading to these opioid related deaths?
Well, I think access. I think that there's still access to opioids that we need to figure out a way. And we are, the FDA and local state governments are doing many different things in terms of rules and the law and prescribing. And I think that was
Mhm.
well overdue. As a pharmacist, I share 50% of the responsibility with the provider who writes a prescription for an opiate. And there's more oversight. There are reporting systems like ORS that we have here in Ohio, that anytime a
Right.
patient gets a medication that's an opiate, it's registered on that list. We reference that list every time that patient comes in for another prescription.
Right. But what I was actually getting at is what's happening in the body
All the
that when someone takes opioids that might ultimately lead to them dying. How are they killing people?
well, uh, in the body, there are opioid receptors. So just natural opioid receptors that help treat pain. But as you introduce more opiates, synthetic opiates like oxycodone or hydrocodone or fentanyl, something like that, you begin to upregulate. It's kind of a fancy word, but you begin to make more of those receptors. So as you produce more of the receptors, the dosage that you need to satisfy or treat that craving for to relieve that pain becomes higher and higher and higher. And even as a formerly trained pharmacists, we are taught that there is no ceiling for opiates. That's even in the curriculums today, right? There is no ceiling. So becomes professional judgment and then a good communication with the patient. But we see that it leads to addiction in many ways that we still have not yet understand very well.
Right. And I know that at those higher levels of opiates, you mentioned several of them, Percocet, oxycodone, Percodan, fentanyl, that it can cause us to forget to breathe, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's a narcotic is another word. It causes sleep. And
Yes.
so you stop breathing and unfortunately you pass away. And then you mentioned fentanyl. Why do we hear so much about fentanyl? How is that different than the other opioids that you mentioned?
As you mentioned, the respiratory depression is what's triggered when the opiates are able to penetrate the blood-brain barrier. So fentanyl, the reason that it's so potent is that it's about 100 times more potent than a typical drug or opiate called morphine. And I'll even go farther along to say that we really aren't necessarily just talking about fentanyl. We're talking about carfentanil, which is really an animal tranquilizer. So we hear the word fentanyl, that's more just a word that we hear on the streets, but we're really talking about a crystalline substance that comes from China typically. And that's nothing against China, but it's used to treat larger animals like a rhinoceros, like a horse, like an elephant, but it has made its way over to the United States. And those folks who are able to formulate a pill and a tablet, and many times these are crushed, or don't understand the concentration that can lead to respiratory depression and ultimately death.
Right. So fentanyl has basically made its way into the drug supply. So if you're buying pills off the street, um, or heroin off the street, and you don't know what's in it, carfentanil or fentanyl could be mixed in concentrations that are enough to kill you, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. And then we'll talk about this here in a minute. But even though you're getting that dose of morphine and that opiate, whether it be carfentanil, if it's carfentanil, it's 1,000 times more potent than morphine. So your chance of survival is already limited no matter how healthy you are as someone who is consuming that type of drug. But there is some genetic variance, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There are plenty of folks out there to say, look, I can take medication like opiates, hydrocodone, and it did nothing for me. So when we get to that question, I'm going to explain that. But for the just generally speaking, don't take your risk. If you know if there's fentanyl or carfentanil in that particular pill, or if you're going to snort it, it could lead to death instantly due to respiratory depression or cardiac arrest.
Right. And the thing is, you don't know if it's in there, right? I mean, it doesn't smell like anything. You can't tell if it's mixed in. It doesn't have a telltale color or anything like that. So there's no way really to know if it's in the supply of whatever you're taking, if it's not from a registered pharmacy.
Now, I will
Uh,
say this, some pharmacies now are actually getting pH testers that can determine whether or not for those drug users, you can come in anonymous, you could be a caregiver, and you can actually get a strip to decide whether or not
mhm.
you want to use that drug if it tests positive for carfentanil. So you could go to the CDC and just type in carfentanil or fentanyl strips, and you may be able to find that, or you can reach out to one of us. I'd be happy to direct you in a place that you can get those strips if you're a user to potentially is a life-saving strip for you and your family.
Right. And I think a lot of times in terms of getting treatment, people don't understand that there is treatment available. They think they have to quit cold turkey. Um, Explain to us, what is the treatment for opioid use disorder, known as MAT, or medication assisted therapy?
Absolutely. So, medication assisted treatment is, generally speaking, a program that involves a psychological component where you use medication to aid with reducing those cravings and kind of downregulate those, what we call those receptors for opiates, data that supports the length that you may be using that drug. It's called Suboxone. It's a product that is used all the time that I actually just decided to show folks. It comes in a box just like this, right? These are little strips. Doesn't have to come in a strip form. It can come in a tablet form. But many of those folks are on little doses of buprenorphine or naloxone, which are going to attach to those opiate receptors that we mentioned earlier in the show and help reduce those cravings. Hopefully, overall, reduce your urge to use a more illicit product as an opiate or heroin.
Right. So you mentioned three different things. So Suboxone and buprenorphine are the same, right?
Yeah. So Suboxone is buprenorphine and naloxone together. There's two ingredients
Hmm.
because we didn't necessarily go deep dive into the biochemistry, but your body produces more receptors and those receptors that are named, and we can attach to those receptors to make sure that you reduce those cravings with two ingredients. Now, what I've been seeing over the past few years, there's a lot of allergies to naloxone, so a lot of times patients
Mm.
may get just buprenorphine alone, or they may just get naloxone alone depending on the type of treatment that they're receiving in their care plan.
Got it. So, and the difference between that and methadone, because I think a lot of people think about methadone and standing in line at these special facilities. The difference between going to and getting methadone, which is also a form of medication assisted therapy, versus Suboxone or buprenorphine slash naloxone, is you can get that in the privacy of a one-on-one visit with a doctor, right?
Yes, 100%. There are methadone clinics. The moment you say methadone clinic, you end up, so a lot of folks will have a negative stigma attached to that. But methadone is a
Mhm.
great drug to help stabilize a patient who may not necessarily respond very well to buprenorphine and naloxone or just one of those two together. So methadone has a very what they call strong steady state, which means it stays in the body in balance for you as long as you're adherent to the medication, because we're talking about medication to help, but if you're not adherent to the medication, then this conversation really doesn't mean anything, because it's not going to, those cravings are going to continue to come back. But many drugs available out there, depending on where we will meet you where you need to be met to make sure that if you want to start an MAT program, it will be successful if you allow us to help.
Right. And you mentioned the psychosocial part of this. In talking with you, I understand, your pharmacy is in the middle of downtown Columbus. So it's accessible to a variety of different people who might need it. What are some of the services that you provide from your pharmacy, for example, to make it easier for someone who is dealing with opioid use disorder, trying to get treatment for their addiction, to stay the course and stick to the program?
No, that's a great question. And I'll answer that with one word: honesty. When a patient comes into my pharmacy, we're going to be honest with you and upfront about the care plan, whether it be something for your mood or whether it be something for dependence. We're going to help you understand what those outcomes can look like with open-ended questions, asking you to kind of repeat back what you expect, also based off of the information that we share. So we are very honest and real with our patients. We want you to walk away. If I'm going to give you a tablet or a film that's going to alter your biochemistry, man, you really want to understand that before you leave. I want people to have a peace of mind when they walk out that door, so that adherence level goes back up and that folks actually achieve the success that we talked about at the beginning of the plan.
Yeah. You also told me that you deliver too, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
So
the key to success is, again, that adherence, making sure you get your medicine every day. The last thing we want to do at our pharmacy is cause some level of stress getting your medication, right?
right.
So if we don't want to cause that stress. We'll help you by delivering that medication to you for free, and we'll do it with a smile. We are a little bit different in terms of medication delivery, and that's why we've achieved the level of success that we have here at Doctor's Pharmacy downtown.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to something you said earlier, when you talked about different people's bodies break medications down differently based upon their genetic profile. Why is that important when it comes to treating with medication assisted therapy, especially, buprenorphine?
Well, I'd like to think what's in between my ears is all I need to make a clinical decision. But guess what? The body and DNA can tell me a lot more. I was actually a pharmacist who spent 2 years actually at a place called Aon Global Health, where we studied pharmacogenomics. How does drugs react with your genes? And wow, what we found was amazing, especially in the African American population. Drugs for mood a lot of times wasn't metabolized the same way in the liver. Drugs like naloxone, Suboxone, or naloxone and buprenorphine are metabolized first in the liver. If we're not giving it to you in an injectable form or inhalable form, they consider what's called the first pass to go through your liver. Anytime a drug is going through the liver, whether it be these drugs or any other drug, there's what's called genetic variants. And African Americans sometimes don't, in many cases, don't break that drug down very well, nor do they break down mood meds very well. So we can do a pharmacogenomic test to help determine whether you're a poor, fast metabolizer of these drugs, and then maybe be able to make a clinical decision instead of, guess what? When you tell us that it's not working, give you more.
Right, exactly. So in other words, the genes in our body make certain chemicals in our liver so that when it allows us to break these drugs down as they go through, and some genes, make that process go quickly, and some genes make it go slower. And so in certain people, if it's going really fast, it's going to chew up the medication quicker, right? And so you're going to get an effect, really quickly, but then that effect is going to go away quickly. So if you're pacing yourself with a certain uh, dose of buprenorphine and it's too low, then you're going to get cravings again pretty soon, right? And you're going to more likely have to seek out a street medication, whether it's heroin or fentanyl or whatever is available to you, a oxycodone pill, to help take care of those cravings, because the buprenorphine wouldn't be enough. And so the dose has to be raised. So that's what the pharmacogenomics can tell you, right?
Absolutely. And it can do that in a quick period of time. Within 7 to 10 days, we can have an answer for you. And any pharmacist would be able to tell you those results. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. There are many women who have a cesarean section birth, and they're given oxycodone 5 milligrams, and they've never taken an opiate in their life, maybe at that point, and they find out that they're a fast metabolizer. And I'm not here to make this a sensational story, but what we have found in some of those women, if they're a fast metabolizer and they are breastfeeding, that drug is broken down so quickly that it can be passed through the breast milk and potentially harm or even kill the baby.
Wow. So how do you get pharmacogenomic testing? Is it paid for you by your insurance? You have to pay for it out of pocket?
You can pay for it out of pocket. It's real. The cost of pharmacogenomics has came down, but if you get with a provider like myself or a psychiatrist or your family care, we can figure out a way if it can benefit you by using your insurance or potentially paying out of pocket. But this is a lifelong test. So once you get the results, it doesn't change much. And I will say it could your body changes with age, so the results could change a little bit with age. But generally speaking, this data would be invaluable. Barack Obama, before he left office, dedicated $25 million with the NIH to do more studies to have more precision medicine. But obviously, he's a two-term president, and that initiative was ended with the next president.
Wow. Well, hopefully we'll get more research in that area. But I think it sort of brings us back to that issue of the stigma associated with treating people for pain and treating people for opioid use disorder in terms of prescribing the right amounts of medication. Because there's this whole concept that addiction is a moral failure, that, you're somehow spiritually or mentally aberrant if you have an addiction, whereas it really is a physical health issue, right?
No, absolutely. Many of the patients, again, because we have honest conversations here, many of our patients will tell you there was problems at home. That's why it's important that when you do have a stable home, you don't typically always see a more addiction cases. Now, that's not necessarily to say that's the status quo for everyone, but many of these folks deal with mental problems that started from home, or it could just been something that's biologic. Maybe it's schizophrenia, and that led to addiction. There's so many ways to combat this. We could talk about it for a long time, but generally speaking, many of these folks just had a lot of issues at home that led to that first test of whatever drug they may have tried.
Right, right. And then we talked about the fact that Appalachia was almost ground zero for the opioid use disorder epidemic because of the number of pills that ended up there, because of people being treated for black lung disease and mining accidents and the like. So disability also leads to the potential for addiction as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's out there that wants a good read, you got to get the Sam Quinones book, Dreamland. It talks about how the phrase pill mills even evolved, and it all started in a little local town called Portsmouth, Ohio. It's a small rural town. Look, I have family there, but it's just the truth. It's the facts. It's a great book. Anyone that wants to dive deeper into this subject, that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah. So, I mentioned the the 14-year-old child that died by getting, I didn't mention this, but she actually obtained uh, pills on the dark web that were laced with fentanyl unbeknownst to her. So, how do we make kids more aware of the dangers of opioids that they might get at school, even or on the dark web, or from a family member? How do we make them aware of that, or friends, I should say?
No, that's a great question. I think I don't normally say this, but programs, because without those programs, there is no awareness. We end up allowing someone on the street or a friend to help decide what that drug is. But I'm old enough to date myself and say that there's a program called DARE out there. And that program was police led, and police just came and talked about alcohol and drugs. And it kind of, for a moment, at least reminded me of, hey, Gerald, it's senior year, we're going out and partying. When you see a car that's crashed and you talk about potential lives lost as a result of that drug, it just is a shockwave that potentially was sent through me. But those conversations are very important. I believe they need to start early on. I talk about medication safety as early as kindergarten with kids, because we can't just assume that they got it and as high schoolers. They may have got nothing all up to that point. So we need to start as early as we can and as often as we can, because this epidemic isn't going anywhere anytime soon. We just stopped talking about it.
Right. I think there's this perception that if you talk about a certain behavior that you want people to avoid, especially young people to avoid, that that's going to lead to them doing it. But that's not necessarily the case, right? And so, like you said, you talk to uh, first graders and kindergartners
Right.
early on about medication safety, that doesn't lead to them being more curious to go out and experiment. It actually makes them knowledgeable so that when they are presented with it, they have the information to make an informed decision.
Absolutely. Well, I think a lot of the public just thinks that there's something out there called allostatic stress, just stress you don't see, right? Sometimes I think we have this idea that there's allostatic learning, right? Where there's so much information out there, but in my opinion, there's no wisdom being linked to it, right? So I think we
Right.
got to figure out how to solve that piece of the puzzle, and that's what hopefully you and I can continue to do, and many of our colleagues, to say, hey, just because we have all this information available to us, we got to also figure out a way to make it wisdom. And when that choice actually needs to be made, it's made correctly.
Right, and parents not being afraid to talk to their kids and have those conversations early so that when they are, like you said, in those situations, they have the wisdom to be able to make an informed decision that will help their health as opposed to harm them. So I can't believe it's already time to go to the audience for questions. There's so many more things I wanted to ask you, but
Yeah.
let's bring the audience in. Here is Wayne Bruce. What are we looking like in the chat?
Wow, chat is really booming, and we have a lot of statements more than anything. Carlito Muhammad says, "Thank Allah that he was saved from a 30-year drug addiction, and
Wow.
heroin was his drug of choice." And he says, "God is great, the greatest." So
And
that's incredible.
that is
And
incredible, and thank you for mentioning that because, we talk about this particular opioid epidemic, but we know that there was a heroin epidemic that started in the '60s, and there were
mhm,
many people, especially poor people, especially African Americans, who were stigmatized and labeled
exactly,
as criminals and didn't have the availability of the help that's out there now. And so thank you, to that listener for putting that in the chat. Praise Allah. Praise God, just as he said, that he was able to come through it probably with
right,
many fewer resources than there are now.
right, exactly.
And
Uh,
I can only imagine if that type of testimony stayed silent among the entire world, where would we be?
Mhm.
exactly. With nobody shining their light, uh,
Exactly.
Right,
and
exactly.
shining what is possible. So we want to go
Yes.
to a couple questions, and we have a question coming from the West Coast, and comes from Tiffany Grant, and she asks, "What is successful treatment? What does that look like? And is it never using opioids again? Is that successful treatment?"
I'll take that question. I think just based off of what I've seen over the 15 years of being a pharmacist, when patients can tell me after 2 or 3 years that they've been clean and they continue to wake up every single day and there hasn't been a relapse, that's the definition of success.
Mhm.
Because that's what they're thinking about. They don't want to relapse, and it drives them every day as if as much as they love their families and children. As long as they don't relapse, they are feeling success in any program that they've been a part of.
Right.
Fantastic.
And I think too, just to add to that, I actually used to work in a opioid uh, use disorder clinic, doing population health, and actually saw some patients myself. And you know, there's a saying, there's a song, "We fall down, but we get up." I think
Right.
even if you do relapse, it's not the end, right?
Exactly.
You can get back into treatment and you can continue, and you might stay on buprenorphine for many, many years, but that's okay
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
long as it makes you functional and makes you be able to reestablish your relationships and have quality and joy in life. I think that's important, even if even if you do fall down and things don't work out for you in the moment, to know that you can always go back and get right back in there.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think for me, I have a follow-up question to that. What are some of the things that are common among all people who are successful, who've been successful? Do you find a common thread with them?
I would say many of those folks have a strong family support, or just someone there that supports them. There's a position in many of these MAT programs called a peer support. That is, you're going to start hearing a lot more about. The peer support is a formally trained individual who is most likely someone who suffered from addiction, and that person is able to kind of hold your hand when you really need it. Because really, all of us, whether it's addiction or some other issue, we sometimes it's just nice to have a hand to hold. And I think that peer support is just one way that we can hold someone's hand and just say, hey, it's going to be okay, regardless of the circumstance.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think a lot of instability comes along with addiction, because sometimes people lose their job, they don't have resources, they might lose their house, and all that instability makes it that much harder to stay the course in terms of treatment and adherence to treatment. So I think too, it's not just the person, but it's also the program that the person is in. If it helps to connect them to the resources that they need, especially housing, to make sure that they have that stability in their life, where they can sort of get on their feet again.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So I guess you would say stability is the common thread, having something to fall back on, lean on, just so they can become stable. We have another question in the chat. It comes from Marv West. He says, I have pain from arthritis in my knee and have been successful with physical therapy instead of medications. Do you, as a pharmacist, recommend holistic care to your patients?
Yes, I absolutely recommend holistic approaches to medicine. That, even though I'm a traditional pharmacist and I believe in all the medicine that's behind me, that's synthetic, right? But they all started from a source, and a lot of times that was a tree, right? Even if we're talking about opiates, where did it come from? The poppy plant. So the answer is yes. If I can find a holistic alternative to treatment for pain or any condition for that matter, I would absolutely recommend that. Of course, with the approval or at least some sort of understanding and relationship with your provider, knowing that that's the path that we want to take.
Right. And I think even beyond, I think one of the things that Marv West points he's making is physical therapy. There are all these other modalities other than natural remedies, or other than things that you ingest, that you put in your body, right? There's physical therapy, there's acupuncture, there's chiropractic. There are these other modalities that can be used possibly as a first line therapy, as opposed to necessarily going straight to pills to relieve pain and to address pain. So thank you, Marv. Great point.
Great point. I have another question from Terry Adams. How do you confront a family member who you are concerned about that has an addiction, opioids or otherwise?
That's a very good question. A very tough conversation to have, because many folks that are in addiction, we're used to seeing people in MAT programs that look a certain way that are dealing with addiction. But there are many more people out there that are functional and that you don't know that they're suffering from addiction. And some people will say, why do you even care? Because potentially it could lead to harm. And not only that, it perpetuates this cycle of addiction among maybe people around them. But with that said, if you do suspect someone is suffering from addiction, I recommend that you reach out to that person and just say, hey, do you need any help? Just a general conversation that could take place first. Of course, don't come with an accusatory tone, but if you do feel like someone may be suffering from addiction, I may even ask you, not necessarily immediately, but as soon as you can, get the drug naloxone, potentially to help stop an overdose. This drug here is something that if you do suspect an overdose from a patient, that you would just squirt this in their nose, and that within 30 to 90 minutes, potentially save their life.
Oh, wow.
That's a great. So that naloxone, also known as Narcan, I think it's become even more widespread. You can get it in vending machines now, right?
Yes, absolutely. And if you have any questions about where to get it, call your local pharmacy. They'll be able to direct you. You probably will be able to pick it up in Columbus. Columbus, in Ohio, wherever your local pharmacy is. You could just fill out a form, just a quick questionnaire, so we can document that why you needed it, and you'd be able to get that prescription maybe for free with your insurance or at whatever the cost is wherever you're located.
Yeah. Wayne, weren't you telling me a story about somebody whose life was saved in a McDonald's or something?
Yeah, there was a story on television that a young person, high schooler, had gone into a McDonald's with his friend. His friend went into the bathroom. He did not, in the story, he did not know his friend was doing, and his friend took a long time. So he went into the bathroom, finally found him out, happened to have uh, Narcan on him. Don't know where he got it from. Gave it to his friend, administered it to his friend, and saved a life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And those
it
are
worked.
high schoolers. So
Yeah.
Right.
I think that should be readily available to young people in general. But everybody is. I mean, this is an epidemic, I think. We're used to a pandemic, but I think this is at epidemic proportions. And
It is.
I tell a story about I tell many stories about my dad, but sometimes you were mentioning sometimes we can't tell who's addicted. And my dad one day said he had gone through and got clean at 52, and for 30 of those years, he said he had used for 37 years. For
Wow.
30 of those years, we had no idea he was using. He
Wow.
hit it so well. Nobody had an idea he was addicted to anything. He said he was an alcoholic when I was a child, and no signs of alcoholism, not from a child standpoint. And my mother said she had never seen it. So people can hide things for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just, want people to get well.
Right. And I think, for people who don't have a working definition of addiction, it's anytime it impairs some aspect of your life, whether it's your relationship, your work, your relationship with yourself, right? Your ability to groom and keep yourself up. Anytime it impairs some aspect of your life, that means it's not working for you. It's dysfunctional and you need to get treatment and help for it.
Yeah,
Wow.
and you mentioned those children in the McDonald's story. I think it's also important to note that, those kids can help save a life for mom and dad, and they don't know it. So for any mom or dad, or even any adolescent teenager listening to this show, that if you are wary and you do think that you notice that a friend, another person that knows a friend that potentially is suffering from addiction, you can send a text message. I'd be happy if you responded to me via email, or you can even call me, and we can help you formulate what that text message should look like. There are many people fear that there's some sort of retaliatory issue if you report someone who is suffering from addiction, as if you're somehow complicit. And there are Good Samaritan laws out there that would prevent you from being charged with any type of crime, or for whatever reason, if someone did ultimately overdose. So don't allow that fear to help save a life. So we're here to help. The CDC is here to help. Just reach out to someone, and we'd help you formulate that email or that message or that phone call.
Okay, we have a question from Leonard Levine, and Leonard asks, can you comment on mortality rate disparities, whether homeless people, people of color, is there great disparities in those rates, in those mortality rates?
And assuming, thanks for that question, but assuming you're talking about mortality from opioids specifically.
Yes, from opioids.
Mhm.
I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, when you look at the statistics on opiate overdoses, African Americans don't typically suffer from opiate overdoses as much as Caucasian folks, and I would honestly say that number is probably not accurate, because we just don't talk about it as much. So
Maybe
when
not
you read
reported.
statistics like that, you really have to be able to see through what you believe as an African American, or what you've read on your own, to determine whether a number is true or not. So it's really difficult to answer that question, because I believe that some of those numbers are skewed towards one race, when really it's just not reflected appropriately, because of the forefront and the the truthfulness that some communities don't want to share regarding opiate abuse?
Well, I think also too, though, in some, if you look at different communities around the country, I know here in the Washington D.C. area, um, because of the concentrations, it's a higher concentration of African Americans. Deaths from opioids among African Americans outpace that of Caucasians. But if you go to somewhere like Appalachia or Iowa, for example, there are going to be higher death rates among Caucasians, and also too, we can't leave out Native Americans as well, that there are disproportionate deaths among Native Americans as well. But I think, to your point, we might not talk about it, but the statistics from the CDC are based upon uh, uh, death certificates, sorry, and toxicology reports. So I think there are some there are some statistics out there, but there might be underreporting, if anything, because they might have not tested. There might not have been testing involved in determining that that person actually died of an opioid overdose.
Wow. Well,
Absolutely.
that's the show.
Oh man.
Wow. Well, can't believe that we have gone through so much information in such a short time. Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson, for joining us. You are a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for the work that you're doing in the Columbus, Ohio area. Um, Thank you, Wayne Bruce, for bringing us all the fabulous questions from
Yeah.
our audience. Thank you to my Be Health Empowered family, of course, for tuning in and for asking the great questions, for telling us what you think and what's on your mind. So until I see you, please remember to be wise, to be well, and to be health empowered. Thanks so much for tuning in this week. We'll see you next time.